Have you ever felt like you were up against something too big to handle and wondered where God was in the middle of it? Well, Ted Greenfield has joined us from Invisible Angels to talk about this amazing story, rescuing people forced into human trafficking. Ted, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, can you talk about your story and why you wrote the book, God is in the Fight?
I can start with what is the biggest question that all of us Christians have, and even non-Christians? The biggest question is, oh, what is God's will for my life? What is my purpose? What am I here to do? And we all know we have something. This came, at a later season in my life, and God doesn't waste a wound. He doesn't, He weaves these experiences in your life journey together to really synthesize and crystallize this moment for you. And that may come at 25 or it may come at 65. It's just however God has wired you. So so my story is, I was in a Bible study in 2018, and I had just turned 50-ish, just turned 50, and I was really like, all right, Lord, I don't know what to do with this season of my life. I've been a musician, I've been a comedian, I was a I was at the time I was a multimedia producer at the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm an instructional designer. I love what I do, but I played in Christian praise bands for years, and I really felt that season was winding down. And I remember I said this very small prayer. I didn't even think about it. I said, Lord, just take this next season of my life. And that's when things started to happen that I didn't realize it until I got 10 years past that point. So let's jump ahead to 2018. I'm in a Bible study, and a woman comes to talk to our group about human trafficking in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. And she sits down, and I knew human trafficking was happening in other countries, and I've lived overseas. I've lived in West Africa. I've lived in the Dominican Republic. I've lived in East Asia. And I, as she started to speak, I was like, this can't be happening in the United States. I thought she was making it up. Well, sure enough, about 10 minutes into it, I realized, oh my gosh, she's telling the truth. This is really happening. And I knew less than nothing about it, but it landed in my heart like a wet bag of cement. That's all the way I can describe it. I'm like, I got to do something. I really want to get involved. So I started calling around and looking online and started calling around places. And I ended up calling a organization out in Birmingham, Alabama called Trafficking Hope. I had seen one of their sermons on one of their presentations online. And I just had this kind of crazy idea. Hey, I called him up and I said, hey, do you guys ever need private aircraft to transport survivors around from one place to another, even when they when they get off the street or when they get rescued, to just to move them around for free transportation? And I thought she dropped the phone. She said, "Oh my gosh, Ted, you have no idea what an answer to prayer this is." And I thought, apparently not, but this is how God works. So she um, this phone call turned into a 45-minute prophetic phone call where the director of this organization at the time, she prayed over me that I'd be running an organization with a fleet of aircraft rescuing hundreds, if not thousands, of trafficking survivors. And I'm standing in the hallway of an FAA government building on my cell phone with my hand in the air, and I'm just like, oh, I just felt it, Lord, all right. And I got off the call, and I'm like, now what? How is this going to happen, right? And everything started to slowly happen in these 9-month periods of progressive revelation that I didn't realize were happening until you get way down the line. Um, but what I started calling around and looking online, and I contacted a few people who were doing this or who were tried to do it, and they were really faced with just a hurdle of problems. I remember I talked to one guy. I think he was in Mississippi, and he was a retired police officer, and he had an airplane. And he was just faced with the costs with maintaining his airplane. Then the FAA got involved, and then anytime they had to do a trip, the weather would be bad, and you can't really fly small aircraft in heavy weather. And I talked to a couple other people, and they would just seem to be faced with problem after problem, which I understood working at the FAA. So and I was just praying about it and just I knew this was what I was supposed to do, but I just followed the breadcrumbs. I just kept on moving. And even, I kept on facing this, these wall of impossibilities, but I just kept on moving because it was more of a research project. Like, okay, what's really happening here? Well, then again, 9 months down the road after this prophetic phone call, I'm in a big meeting at the FAA. There's like 45 people in the room. And in the middle of the meeting, I hear God tell me invisible angels. And it was
Oh,
just like, all right. And right away I knew he wanted me to buy the domain name invisibleangels.org. Right away. I just leaned back. I said, Lord, that domain name is going to be $3,500. I do not have $3,500. I know I'm a multimedia producer. I'm a web developer. I know this is my space, Lord. You're kind of doing one of these things. And then I hear it clearly as day. I just hear, go buy invisibleangels.org. And I said, okay, fine, just you watch. So I politely closed my laptop and I snuck out of politely left the meeting, walked down the hall, went back into my office, plugged my laptop into the docking station, opened up, and I'm just thinking it's going to be $3,500. It's going to be $3,500. And I type in invisibleangels.org in my register.com account and it pops up available $35.
oh my
And,
gosh.
and I'm just like, and I clicked on purchase and God told me two things. He said, speak life into this organization as if it's up and running and write a budget. And okay. And I just said, now, the budget piece, Lord, I did fail accounting 3 times in college. The third time, the instructor let me pass because she was doing the world no favors by keeping me in basic accounting for 3 semesters. Um, and I said, okay. And he gave me an impossible task. I know production budgets very well, but to actually, to start a budget for this organization, I had no idea what to do. So I worked on this for about 9 months. And I didn't develop a website with the URL. I just, kind of held on to it. And then COVID happens. My dad dies. They just kind of life turns upside down. And I end up full time in Florida and I'm in an online Bible study down there, and I'm everywhere I'm going, I'm just speaking life into invisible angels. I'm just like, this is the vision for the organization God gave me, and whether you want to hear it about it or not, I'm going to tell it to you. And so I'm telling everybody in this Bible study about the vision, and this retired airline pilot, Bob, he said, "Hey, I have the perfect plane for you. The perfect aircraft for you is a Cessna P210." And it's got a low fuel cost. It's a 6 passenger plane. It's pressurized. They're affordable. They're between 250 and $500,000, and that's the perfect plane for your mission. So after the Bible study, I get on this website called tradeaplane.com where they have used aircraft on it, and I pulled up Cessna P210s, and sure enough, they're about 250 to 500 grand. There was a bunch of them available, and they were the perfect plane for a startup like this. Absolutely perfect. But I didn't have 250 to $500,000. I'm like, all right. So I just kept on, and for 9 months, nothing happened. But God was working in the background. So
Mm.
I'm back up in DC 9 months later in a meeting, and I just catch this sermon by Stephen Furtick called "When God Gives You a Green Light." And during this sermon, I was just like, oh my gosh, I just felt, all right, I got a green light, Lord, but where is it? What am I supposed to do? What's going to happen? I'm listening to this sermon and I'm kind of looking under the pillows for the blessing, and and after the sermon, I just had that feeling for the rest of the afternoon, that something is going to happen, something big's going to happen. And then later on that day, I just had nothing to do, so I just opened the computer up to tradeaplane.com because pilots look at airplanes. And the first ad that popped up was a Cessna P210, just like Robert prophesied 9 months earlier. And all the ad said was, I want to donate this plane to a nonprofit.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm like, so the short story is I contacted the owner via email. He called me back the next day. I don't know what all I remember I saw it was, from Kansas City and I'm like just Jesus God, Holy Spirit, airplanes, human trafficking victim. I don't know what I said, right? Just a mess. And he goes, son, slow down, slow down. I want you to have the airplane. And
Wow.
I flew out to Kansas City and he signed the aircraft over to me and we did our first trip in 2021. And from the Bible study, to the first trip was 3 years. And it was
Wow.
3 years of this apparent nothing. But then when a big miracle happens like that, then you connect the dots back into where you see God told you to move, you moved. All right. So our part is very easy, but it's very hard at the same time because you're completely walking on faith. And it's the way I can think of explain it to you is you're walking on a lake that's a sheet of ice, and then it just starts to get warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer, and you're going to be walking on the water. So we did our first trip in
Unbelievable.
2021. Yeah.
That is what an amazing story. So that's not where you end.
Oh,
That's where you begin.
yes. So what happened? So after that, we did a few flights. We did one, two, three, four flights, five flights, and then you know, God told me to ride a budget because the management of an aircraft of that caliber is a lot, and it's expensive. And fuel isn't your only, fuel is one of your highest costs, but that's not your highest cost. And the aircraft has to be maintained, and you really have to stay on top of that. And it's quite complex to manage that. Well, so then we get a call from Homeland Security, and they say we've got, and the agent leads the call with, we, he said the father and the teacher will never see the light of day again. We've got a young child who was abducted into a child pornography ring.
Hmm.
We have an agent waiting with the child. We need to get the child home to his mother. Can you help?
Oh,
And long story short, we had him home by lunch the next day.
oh my gosh.
And it just everything went very smoothly with that. And that was just really wonderful. That whole thing. Plus it
So,
also it showed that the status or the scope of human trafficking in this country is actually quite worse than what I thought, because he was abducted into a child pornography ring by his father and the teacher.
oh,
And there's a high percentage, I don't want to say most, but there's a very high percentage of trafficking survivors in the United States that are trafficked by someone that they know, which usually is a family member.
oh no.
And we have had multiple cases like that, multiple cases. So that's just one of the most alarming, the alarming truths about trafficking in this country.
Mhm.
So, and they're all American kids. We're not talking about, these aren't immigrants, these aren't foreigners, these aren't, people, trying to get in, or, Eastern Europeans. They're all Americans. So
Mhm.
anyway, so I was telling some people at work about the organization and what we did, and they said, "Hey, we'd love to do a story on you for the FAA." So they did a story on invisible angels, and it went out to about 50,000 employees worldwide. And I was like, okay, great. Maybe some donations will come in, some awareness, whatever. Well, a few days later, I get a call from the Washington, D.C. Flight Services Directorate Office. And that's like you or me or any other average citizen getting a call from the IRS. It's usually not good news. And it's like, why is the IRS calling me? Well, I looked at my phone, and I was like, why are these people calling me? And then I said, because I'm an optimist, I said, maybe they're calling me to congratulate me, right? So I pick up the phone and I call Mr. Greenfield. We saw the news article on you, and they said, how are you doing these flights? And I said, well, I'm doing it under Part 91 charitable operations and charitable flights. And they said, well, no, actually, you're operating an illegal airline. And they opened a compliance action against me, which is like opening, official charges. And they charged me with operating an illegal air carrier, an illegal airline. And I'm looking at $1.4 million of fines. They can take away the plane from me. They can take away my pilot's license. I'm in a lot of trouble in about 3 minutes. And guess where I work? At the FAA. So,
Oh
I mean, it's
my.
just like, and I remember I got off the phone. It was a very short phone call, and they were very nice, but they were very serious. And I know how these guys work because I'm in the agency. And I hung up the phone, and I just said, God, what's going on? I did everything you wanted me to do. God said, don't worry, just tell my story. And that peace came over me. I was like, okay, it's going to be cool. I just knew it was going to be all right. There was a lot of trouble I had to go through. Well, anyway, the short story is I had to get a lawyer. And in the book, it goes on to explain that the lawyer I got was the premier aviation attorney in Florida, who I just happened to know. I had a friend named Ed with a really cool airplane. I knew he was an attorney, but we never talked about work. I didn't know where he worked, and I had gone flying with him a few times and made some videos for him. And Ed's this great guy. I thought he was like a freelance lawyer. I never asked him any questions. Well, when I was referred to Ed, you got to talk to Ed Page. He's the greatest lawyer in Florida, and he's the premier aviation attorney in the country. And I'm like, Ed Page? I know Ed Page. I went flying with Ed Page. And it was the same guy. His first
Wow.
question to me was, Ted, how did this all start? And I said, do you believe in Jesus? And he said, yes. And I told him the long story of how everything happened. And he's like, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. So it gets to the day of the hearing. It's all on Zoom. I get on, Ed's on, I'm on, and then there were about five or six FAA people on, and they're very serious. And it's a safety hearing, and it's an official hearing, and it's a big deal. The first question they asked me, well, Mr. Greenfield, how did this all start? I leaned in and I said, do you guys believe in Jesus? And they all looked at me like, just with blank faces. And I went on to tell them the whole story of how God started this organization. And I had such peace. I was really excited to tell them about it. And afterwards, they just said, "This is amazing. This is really amazing. We have to help you." So they said, "We're going to get back to you with our findings." And then they got off the Zoom call. And Ed said, "Don't be surprised if they get back to you in 9 months, because that's what the FAA usually, that everything takes time there." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I work there, so I." So anyway, 3 weeks later, I get an email and saying, we have a new hearing date. We've come to our findings. Here's the hearing date. So I get online, which was the next day. And Ed and I get online, and they all get online. And they let off with, Mr. Greenfield, we truly believe this was an oversight on your part. We're dropping all the charges against you. You do need to be a Part 135 air carrier, which takes about 4 years and could cost upwards of $500,000 just in everything. I mean,
Oh
and there's
no.
just you just don't almost have to get invited to become a direct air carrier. And they said, we're gonna they can't technically help me, but they said, we're gonna see that through for you. We're gonna guide you. And the short story is, and I didn't really receive any special treatment, but the short story is, we became a direct air carrier in 18 months, and for completely for free. Companies came out of the sky. God delivered companies to do all of our paperwork, all of our safety briefing, our hazmat, our training materials. The aircraft inspectors came out. The plane had to, be inspected, and that happened in 18 months. And it was an absolute miracle that, number one, that happened at all. Number two, it happened so fast. And then number three is, we're the only Part 135 direct air carrier that is specifically serving the human trafficking rescue need in this country.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable story.
Yeah.
No, I keep thinking nothing is impossible for God.
Nothing is. And then, it goes to the financial aspect. So once we were becoming a Part 135 air carrier, now the plane, it doesn't get inspected by your average mechanic. Now it has to go to an FAA Part 145 repair station, and they do a complete inspection on it as well. And that happens every 100 hours of use, and every mandatory annual inspection. And that plane had never been through a Part 135 inspection before. So the basic rule is, if anything is broken that has not had, or if any aspect of the plane has not had a 100-hour inspection on it, it has to be mandatorily replaced. The aircraft is a 1980. It never had anything. So our first annual inspection bill came to $55,000.
What? And how did that
Yes.
get covered?
Uh, Donations. It came in $25 at a time.
Oh my gosh, that's
And then there
amazing.
was a whopping miracle, which is the Elijah fill your jars with oil story. And that's all in the book. And I want people
Yes.
to read that, because when we are faced with a mountain of that insurmountable impossibilities, we have the answer.
Hmm.
We have the
Hmm.
answer. It's you have it. And the miracles had just come through. And it was very painful, because I went into a tailspin, and And then our accountant, our volunteer Maria, who's just so wonderful. And I said, let's meet for dinner. And basically, it was a dinner so I can come to complain to her about how are we going to do this? Right? How is this going to happen? I was really, really flipping out. And she looks at me across the table and she said, let me tell, and I didn't know her at all. I'd maybe known her 6 weeks, we'd brand new friendship. And she looked at me and she goes, the longer you freak out about this, the longer this is going to take. And that was a fire hose of ice. And I just stopped freaking. I'm like, you're exactly right. God will handle this. He didn't take me this far to leave me stranded. And in literally 3 weeks after that dinner conversation, it was all done.
Unbelievable. It's just you got out of God's way so that he could work. And I think that's the problem with so many people. They don't know when to get out of God's way and see him working and the miracles in their life.
Yeah, and it's still happening because I still now the plane actually is going into this year's annual inspection. It might be $55,000 again. It depends because there's new airworthiness directives, there's new things, and that's a really good thing on the safety side because there's not one brake line, there's not one wire, there's not one screw that's not inspected by the FAA, and our passengers and me as the pilot want that. I mean, you want a completely safe airplane, and I really don't care what it costs and nor should the public. It costs what it's going to cost because this is what it takes and we have precious cargo.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't really care. God will provide it. If it's God's will, it's God's bill.
Yes. And so everyone, so that what a great read. God is in this fight, how God made a way to rescue human trafficking survivors. I mean, this story is unbelievably great.
The biggest support we can have is number one is prayer. That
Mhm.
is that is just so key. And number two is our budget. Our budget is written at about $362,000 a year, and it comes in $25 at a time. And people may think, oh, $10 isn't going to help. $10 is going to help if 1,000 people do it. And
Mhm.
and partnering with us at $5 to $10 a month that's you don't need to do anything any more than that because
Mhm.
then as more people do it, then the budget comes in, and God turned 5 loaves of fish and fed 5,000.
He did. He
And
did.
that's where we've seen the money come in like that. And now our biggest need is we do need a new aircraft, and that aircraft we need is it's about $3.5 million. We need we need something that could go from. We had a request recently to go to from Naples to Boston, from Eau Claire, Wisconsin to Alaska. A lot of requests to go to California, and
Mhm.
we need a much more serious aircraft to do that. And I believe
Mhm.
that's going to happen. And plus that original prophetic phone call where I'd be running an organization with a fleet of aircraft. Well, that's God's plan. So I just got to make sure I stay out of the way.
That's it. Well, I believe that everyone, not only can you donate to this wonderful ministry, but you can also be praying for it. He asked for that. He asked for prayer. So, that's something if you can't afford to do the donation, that prayer is free and he needs it. So, and all I keep thinking of is that how God is just like lifting him up to transport him to other places so that he will be able to help other people, right? That's God's hand
Yeah.
lifting him up. And so I need to ask you the question for someone who's listening, who feels like the fight is too heavy, what's one truth they can hold on to?
I think Gideon has a nice story to tell about that. God doesn't choose, he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. God's kingdom is also upside down. He uses the foolish to confound the wise. And no, and the biggest one that I say all the time, tell me one story in the Bible that makes sense. Tell me one story in the Bible that makes sense. Every single story in the Bible and every single Christian ministry that's really up and thriving, and not that they're a multi-million-dollar ministry. There could be very small ministries that are up and thriving. They all start with people like, I can't do this. You chose the wrong guy here. And I took the call immediately, but even now, I'm like, how is this going to happen? And I stopped asking, how's this going to happen? And I started saying, show me how this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything God will ask you to do will be out of your reach, out of your expertise, too
Mm-hmm.
big, too strong, too scary. We have to remember that we're not the only ones looking at our ministry. People are watching us. And I have friends in my life who aren't believers and who are just like, what are you doing in human trafficking? That's the farthest thing away from anything that you've ever done. And I'm like, this landed in my heart. This is all God. And they laugh and they're like, yeah, sure, and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, God's word will set out and accomplish what it is set out to do. It will not
Mm-hmm.
come back void. So it may not make sense and it probably won't make sense. But at the end of the day, just watch God work and just follow those breadcrumbs. And it will be scary. And you're, how is this going to work? Just keep on moving. He told Abraham to go. Where? Just keep on moving. Moses is backed up against the sea. God, what did you do? Bring us out here to kill us? No, I didn't. What are we supposed to do? Keep moving. There's an ocean over there. Keep moving. And then God's like, what are you looking at me for? Go.
Mm-hmm.
Exodus chapter 14, verse 15, 16, and 17. Go. And
Mm-hmm.
not only was the Egyptian army wiped out in that story, but the Egyptian economy was wiped out. The Egyptian army was wiped out. Their entire society was just leveled because they lost their entire labor force, they lost their army, and they lost their economy. They
Mm-hmm.
were
Mm-hmm.
pillaged. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's there's you keep on looking in God's story and there's always roots that, that dig, go way, way, way deep.
I love the way that you answered God's call because a lot of people, God might be calling them and they may be hearing it, but they're not stepping into it. Can you speak into that a little bit about God's will?
Yeah, it's very scary and it won't make sense. It didn't make sense to me. But go back to that very first prayer I said when I was 50-ish. And I said, take this next season of my life because I was a musician and and uh I just I was I was done. And it wasn't like, oh, I hate my life or anything. I love my life. It was, a great life. I had sailboats and, a couple of houses. It was wonderful. But it didn't mean anything anymore. It just didn't. And I wanted all of God. And I remember I was, playing in Christian praise bands, and I thought, okay, maybe I could, maybe this next season will, I could kind of, because I'm, kind of the older guy in the band. And I really didn't want to be that guy in the band anymore. I wanted to look at these young guys and go to your room and play what's on that piece of paper. I wanted, God's new direction because I didn't feel, I didn't feel I was old in God's eyes. I never felt I was old, but time is time. And and then one day, just in the past few years, I just kind of hit one of these emotional brick walls one night. Just it happens, right? And I started feeling old and everything. And I remember just leaning back and just doing this. And I'm like, God, kind of in 20 years, I'm going to be 82, right? One of these things, right? Oh, right. Oh, it's going to happen. And God said, I tell time what to do. I was like, you certainly do. You certainly do. I mean, my mood just vanished. And I was just like, yeah, okay, let's go. And that really stuck with me because God does tell time what to do. And just that concept alone, you stop and think about it. God tells time what to do. We're all kind of in this race against time. We don't have time to do this. I don't have time to start this ministry. I'm 58 years old and you want me to start an airline, basically. I mean, and not that I feel old, I'm in great shape and everything, but it's like, well, how, in 20 years I'm going to be 80. Right.
You're so encouraging. I thank you so much for your encouragement for someone,
Thanks.
just me and anybody out there. I mean, I'm being encouraged by this story and by what you're saying. So, now you can find out more again about this ministry, invisibleangels.org.
We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, and And then yeah, that's that's more to come on that.
What would you like to leave my audience with today?
Number one is prayer. Number two is the awareness that human trafficking is happening in this country. And again, it's not foreigners, it's not kids, immigrants being, crossing over into the border from El Salvador or Central America, and then they're stuck. Although that does happen, the majority are American people from age 8 to 48, and they are being bought and sold. This is really happening. So it's the awareness. And if you ever should be kind of out and about and you see something that doesn't look right, a girl in their 20s or even a boy in their 20s that's just confused, they're in the wrong place, just something is not right, just call 911. I just say, hey, don't, if they start a conversation, that's fine, but don't go being a hero and, I'm going to solve this and find it because it may not be the case. But just drop a call to 911 because it's much more frequently, it's happening much more frequently than you know. And it's if you're within, 20 miles of a major city, it's happening 5 miles from you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. What's one small step we can take this week to invite God in the fight? Don't forget to like and subscribe and to share for more Christ-centered conversations. Visit the website, thecallwithNancySabato.com. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.